big metal. Anyway, I'll get going. You guys don't have to mute yourself, folks. If they jump in, they can jump in as we go. I just wanted to say the reason why I was starting with permaculture is because I've been into it, studying it. I've done a PDC and for about 15 years, and so I think it's very, very useful in so many aspects of landscape management and landscape design, particularly. But when you're approaching land, particularly in arid regions, it's got some real useful ideas, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. So what we're going to talk about today is the history of permaculture, the PDC, which is the kind of foundational teaching course that was originally designed when the two gentlemen who came up with permaculture came up with permaculture. It has kind of changed since then. Cautions around permaculture education, because there are so many people offering it now, and why that happens. Ideas for the urban yard, and for particularly the drought tolerant urban yard. Books that I would recommend that are actually available in our Chinook Arch Regional Library System. And then the continuing relevance of it, because it kind of has taken a dip in popularity, I think, recently, and you'll discover why. But before we get going, I have been teaching, Svenja knows, some classes for Environment Lethbridge, and I have neglected my land management, and I'm devastated. So I'm going to start today, and we acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional lands of the Niitsitapi people of the Canadian Plains, and we offer respect to the Métis and all who have lived on this land and made Lethbridge their home. As environmental leaders, we understand this place provides for the spiritual, culture, and physical needs of the Blackfoot people and the land of the buffalo. We look to the future. We hope this place and its people are cared for and stewarded by all with a spirit of reciprocity that sustains us for generations to come. We commit to understanding our role as treaty people and not to flinch in the face of history. I really like that one. There's a whole bunch that I've given, and that's one of my favorite ones. But we continue on. I'm trying a new screen share too, so bear with me here. It's going to kind of flip back and forth. Whoops. There we go. So these are the two founders of permaculture, Mr. Bill Mollison, who worked at the University of Tasmania and developed the Department of Environmental Psychology, and David Holmgren, who was a student of environmental design at the Tasmanian College of Environmental Education. What's important to note about these two men is that they developed a framework they called permaculture that enveloped agriculture, ethics, and environmentalism. Their whole plan was to create a school of this line of thought and structure of design. But their work was based on pieces that were developed by dozens and dozens, probably millions of other people worldwide. So permaculture was this giant amalgamation of different ideas in crop management, combined with environmental strategies and the right to food. So it was an important response at the time in the late 60s and early 70s to conventional agricultural methods that basically stripped the world of its topsoil. And within 20 years, they noticed how devastating the heavy tilling was. So that was why they started developing it, and how this large scale agriculture that was supposed to feed the world after the Second World War was actually causing degradation of the environment. But the second thing to note about these two gentlemen is that they parted ways almost as soon as they finished their design school. And that schism lives on in permaculture itself. It kind of has become the hallmark of it, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail. So things like animal husbandry and incorporating apiaries for honeybees, large animal forage in brassica cover crops, in large-scale agriculture, as well as small animal husbandry like the ducks and chickens in paddock systems through vegetable crops, assist in soil fertility and pest control without having to do a lot of work. That's the whole basis of permaculture, is that there isn't this great need to do huge energy inputs in order to get out energy. That was the whole basis of it. So using guild and companion planting, chop and drop cultivation, and animal husbandry itself is one of the biggest ones, is an efficient way to support soil nutrients without tillage and without extra transportation inputs, which have become so extensive these days. So the idea is to capture available water and nutrition, sources that have perpetually produced seasonal crops with no use of tillage or herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides that will harm soil microbes or pollinators or humans. Also, the whole point is to preserve the soil with continual cover cropping. It's never to be exposed in permaculture, and to attempt to artificially create mature forest ecology with food crops. So essentially, permaculture creates this managed landscape that in fact mimics an unmanaged naturescape to produce to produce food on a very large scale. So this farm right here actually is a picture of an Alberta permaculture farm called Cohen Farm near Lacombe. And I actually met the son of the Cohens. It used to be an organic farm, but they couldn't afford the inputs to it, so they were going to close the farm down. And he got into permaculture. He was in, I think, his early 30s at the time. And what they do now is produce hay, beef, pork, eggs, and moderate seed crops with no tillage at all. In fact, they also don't have irrigation up there, and they put vast on-contour swales on all of their slopes to capture water. And they're into several generations of swine now, but when they first started, it only took 2 generations of making their swine harvest to do the tillage in certain areas to cause a change in the snouts to make the shovels bigger. So they've done some really incredible work really nearby. And one of their big folks that they followed is an American farm in North Dakota called Brown's Ranch. And he also does no tillage at all and likes to talk about how their input costs have basically been their entire profit in the last 10 years because they just keep decreasing their inputs. So so much great work going on with it. Now, because of Mollison's psychology background, permaculture was also designed to be a food system reset. So it was designed to create a framework that incorporated ethics, education, and human-based economics, which is really similar to the donut economics that are coming up, where not economists, but other people in society believe that there's more relevance than just GDP and finances as a guide wire for the well-being of a society, and there should be. So this picture itself is called the permaculture flower, and it shows the 12 permaculture principles, which we'll talk about in a moment, at the heart of the flower. And these principles affect all of society. That was their base model, that it was about food, but it was also about everything else in society. So it was originally about meeting societal agricultural needs on a large scale, but it's due to its original issues of schisms between the 2 men that created it. It now represents thousands of individuals working worldwide in their own little silos, essentially, offering private education courses. But before we get to the negative things, I wanted to really kind of cover or go over quickly the 12 principles of permaculture, which I think is well worth printing off and putting on your wall, especially if you're a new gardener or someone who's taking their time with their yard or their land that they're working with, because every single one of these things is something that you can try in your yard. The first one, observe and interact, is so important, and it's something that I bring into a lot of my classes. Like, make sure you take at least a year. You can still do things, but watch where your water runs. Watch where things collect. Watch where the weed grows and try to figure out why there's weeds there. Where are pests going? What trees have more problems? That kind of thing. Catching and storing energy is the basis of permaculture, and particularly in arid regions, we're catching and storing water. And in every single case, whenever you make a change in your yard, you should try and make a change so that that water is captured, so that there is not runoff from your property, because that's what's going to allow your trees and plants to continue to grow. Obtaining a yield doesn't have to be about food. It can be about biodiversity. It can be about pollinators. It can be about growing plants that are native so that you can uphold native species and give them food. It can be about putting in a mountain ash instead of a green ash, just so that the birds have some forage in the late winter. So you should always think about, especially when you're putting in new plants, about plants that do something more than just offer shade. Accepting feedback is a big one, especially for folks who have this real idea about what they want in their yard or what they want on their land. I think part of the problem with design is that people are like, well, I want this over here and I want that over there. And a lot of times your property just can't accept it. Almost always in the case of water. I had a permaculturalist who said the best places for pathways are in the places that flood, because you don't go out and walk around when it's pouring with rain or when it's snow melt, right? So for roads and walking trails, where your water pools is a great place to put like a trail for your car or your truck or your wheelbarrow, because that is a place where you don't want to garden anyway, for the most part. So all of the steps and the principles of permaculture are really, really great. And I like to, anytime I get stuck, I kind of go through and say, what am I missing here? What am I missing? But my favorite one is slow and small solutions, because when you do make a huge change and it doesn't work, it takes a lot of time and money and energy to change it. And so making small solutions that have a big impact is the best way to approach kind of staged landscaping. Which brings us to the permaculture certification course. Now, the original certification course was developed by Mollison himself. It's meant to be taught in person, 72-hour course. They have, the cost is variable right now. It can be anywhere from under $1,000 to over $3,000. Who knows? If you Google right now schools of permaculture, you will get hundreds of hits back. And the requirements of the course that it's in person have even been kind of pushed aside. So the original PDC manual, I'll show it to you, is this thing. It's an absolute tome. So the fact that they call it a permaculture design certification in 2 weeks is pretty shocking. Number one, it shouldn't be called a certification, but I think they had the right idea, thinking about like an actual school, like a higher learning school. But the 2-week course, definitely, if you get the right teacher, has some great stuff that it can teach you, but it basically is an overview of everything in this book. So they cram so much stuff in, and The other problem is that because of the schism between Mollison and Holmgren, there were two different schools teaching different courses, and then their students from there then on also developed their own schools. So it doesn't have any regulation whatsoever. I have attended one. I'm familiar with several other schools. What's included in every PDC for sure is an overview of the principles, recognizing patterns in nature, which I didn't find super valuable actually as a gardener. But I can see why they put it in there. System-based design methodology is a really good idea. Like the whole, how does it fit into the whole is an interesting thing. Trapping and storing energy, most important thing, but they talk about it in a lot of nuanced terms a lot of the time. So you have to really find out what works for you, because there's permaculture in workplaces and permaculture on the farm and permaculture in your backyard, and there's permaculture everywhere. And the other thing I really like is prioritizing efficiency. So for example, if you're going to put a composter in your yard, trying to put it in a place that kind of goes from the garden to the green bin so that you can move your things easy, or if you have hens, making sure that it's nearby your chicken coop, things like that. So potential problems for folks who are really interested in permaculture, and this permaculture really had it really took off for a while, and then I think because of this dysregulation, it has kind of nosedived a bit. So permaculture is unregulated entirely because none of the ideas were original. They could never certify it as their own unique thing. So, for example, the no-till method of food production, which is one of the founding ideas of agriculture in permaculture, was first publicly communicated, and a book was written about it by an American woman at the end of World War II. She was 60 years old. And so the fact that they brought it in as part of their system of design, I think that's why they had trouble. But secondly, the schism between the two men with the two different schools has become the hallmark of it. So anybody can teach permaculture because they, as permaculturalists, and there isn't even, there's a lot of people that practice it, but there isn't even like a guild or a group or a board or anything. They're completely anarchic and anarchic. they're anarchy, and in a lot of ways that might appeal to people, but if you're a student spending $3,000 and you're hoping to learn something at the end of the day, and particularly if they're trying to attract folks who have good education backgrounds and who understand what their dollars are supposed to translate into once they're spent, it's a very, very difficult sell to folks who don't get anything at the end. You get a PDC certificate that literally means nothing, or it could mean something different depending on who has it. There's also been controversies around these things. So depending on who teaches it, and I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but the inclusions of the course are at the whim of the facilitator because there is no regulation. And that is tough if they start talking about politics, or they start talking about their own beliefs or practices or other things that they're doing that they're trying to slip into it that have nothing to do with it. That was my experience. And so, which makes a lot of your days really uncomfortable, in my opinion. But another really important problem is that every school of permaculture is a private for-profit school, and it kind of goes directly against its own ethics because not everybody has access to it. And the last thing, graduates of a PDC not certified in anything. One of the gals in my PDC had purchased a place out in BC, and she was not a gardener, but she wanted to be, and thought that at the end of her 2 weeks she was going to have like she was going to have all these ideas on how to get her farm started, and she was in tears at the end of it because there was so much information, and she just didn't have anything that she was going to be able to take with her. So having said that, I think that there are very, very valuable instructors out there. And I know one up in Calgary who I've learned from. She's amazing. She is a former biologist and actually said to me, we need to make this far more legit. The problem with all the hippies coming in, nothing wrong with hippies, but them wanting to keep it all loosey-goosey and kind of whatever goes, is that it really does undercut them trying to make it a very important movement in landscaping and horticulture. So take that with a grain of salt. However, great ideas for urban design are the 12 principles, just to have them on the wall. Permaculture zones, every single design, landscape design way of being, school, if for lack of a better term, has a way to break up your property so that you can tackle it in an easier way and put in plants that will suit certain areas in your yard. So it's kind of a great inclusion. Water is the primary concern, is I think the most important thing. And if you always come from, I'm going out to trap water, that if that is your foundational space in your landscape journey, then I think that permaculture has done its job. I like the increasing edge. The idea in permaculture is that all energy enters and leaves a system from its edge, but increasing the edge, and there's many, many ways to do that, we'll talk about it, increases your water capture. So anytime you can make a wavy line instead of a straight line, make a curve instead of a square, you're going to capture more water. And that is mimicking nature. So here are some zones, and these are the permaculture zones. And keep in mind that it was originally designed for large pieces of land. So they wanted you to put your herb and salad gardens close to the house, and then move out into your small fruits and larger roots, and then your orchards and your woodlands where your animals would get forage, and then your unmanaged areas. And I think in urban design, you can kind of go with the first three as your first zone, and then this middle zone where you have your bigger trees, and always include some unmanaged areas in your yard, even if you have to build them to be unmanaged. So it's not just like crazy weeds, but it's really great to build out from your house, because you really do spend the most time by your house, number one. And number two, in urban design, all of your water comes from your house, all of it. So like all of the water coming off your roof, it's a huge amount of water. The water from your spigot is coming out of your house. Water from your sink is coming out of your house. And so it kind of designing in a way where you don't have to transport that water is a really great way to approach it. So I quite like the permaculture zones. Capturing and storing water, humans have been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. These are, of course, the Incan terracing in the Andes, on the southern slopes of very, very steep mountainsides. That was the only place they had to grow food. And similar practices are still used today in places like India and Pakistan and regions of the Himalayas, because they've never been able to get equipment in there. They've never been able to get irrigation in there. And in fact, there's a huge booming permaculture movement in northern India right now. Some of the biggest schools in the world are in northern India, where they do produce a heck of a lot of food with no large tractors and just a lot of people power, and a lot of really smart water capture and energy capture technique. So terracing doesn't just assist in combating drought tolerance by capturing water. It also affects our watersheds because it captures things like leaves, and it doesn't allow for so much runoff to be going down the drain all the time and getting all this debris into our watersheds. So I always tell folks, anytime you open up your land, you should be leveling it. Like, even if you're just going to put in a tree, if it's on a slope, you're going to make the well of the tree flat so that that water can be captured. The surface water can be captured. Now, when it comes to edge, we're having a fruit fly explosion. When it comes to edge, this is the Bouchard Gardens. So beautiful. You'll notice when I talk about edge, there's all sorts of different edges. So this is kind of a path within a path, and you'll notice that their pathway is level, but that the turf path that leads to the beds, which is another pathway, is actually sloped towards the beds. And then the beds have these long curves, so they kind of undulate in and out. And water is hydrophilic, so its nature is to stay with itself until it gets so big that it will overflow itself, if that makes any sense. So it's almost like a mouse or a rat, where it'll crawl along edges and stay trapped in the areas where you have the vegetation that you want the water to go to. Because turf, funnily enough, doesn't require that much water. And it can also get water that it needs from areas that do have more water. So this is mimicking nature in that it's increased its edge. There's lots of layering in the gardens, and it just looks really beautiful. You're able to see it. So all of these ideas are that you can use them in residential design as well. And finally, when we mimic nature, I always like to tell folks who are starting to work in their yards that they become Mother Nature, that when you start designing your yard for what you want for your little ecosystem, you become Mother Nature. And every time you hand water something, it becomes a flood for that plant. And you kind of have to think what happens in nature when there's a flood. What does it do to the soil? What does it do to the soil particles? What does it do to the bacteria in the soil? So you want to, anytime you create a disturbance in your little micro landscape, you always want to think about how am I benefiting this landscape, right? And try to mitigate the harms that you might do by stomping around, by overwatering. There is such a thing as overwatering. I mean, obviously it's not good when we don't have that much water, but it's also unneeded by a lot of plants. We're not a tropical area, and a lot of our plants are not meant to be tropical. And so when they start getting a lot of water, they grow exponentially. They grow really fast. A lot of the native varieties will grow really fast if you give them excess water, but they also want to keep that water. They want to keep drinking that water. And so you end up getting a lot of dieback when they don't have it. So just always be mindful about how you are managing your landscapes, in that you become God, essentially. So these are some books that I would recommend. I've got a couple of them here. Gaia's Garden is one of my favorite. And actually, Toby Hemingway, I'm sad, he died of cancer a few years ago, but he was one of David Holmgren's students, and he created his own school of permaculture as well. But he's just such... his writing is just so good. I think he was out of California, I'm pretty sure. So most permaculture books are on the coast. FYI, you're dealing with zone 10 plants, zone 12 plants sometimes. The ideas are great, but a lot of the plants don't work up here. So just always keep that in mind. And the other thing is they have so much more water than we do most of the time. But this one, Gaia's Garden, A Guide to Home Scale Permaculture, I've loaned this out to so many folks, and let me know if you want to borrow it. They also have it at the library, but it's just such a nice, it's got great plans in it. interesting chapter on soil and how to build soil health, which I think is so, so important. And it really brings the zones into an urban setting. So I would really recommend that one. This one's a really, really accessible book as well, The Vegetable Gardener's Guide to Permaculture. If you're into vegetable gardening, it's super easy read. And one of my favorite things is it brings in tree guilds. And if you've ever heard of tree guilds, it's especially with fruit trees. When you plant a fruit tree, because they produce so much, they tend to need a lot more nutrients than other trees do. And so a tree guild asks for the tree, and then a dynamic accumulator, which offers nutrients to the soil without you having to do anything but cut it and leave it. It's a chop and drop. And then you put in bulbs like garlic or daffodils or anything, because the bulbs, their root systems really benefit tree roots. And so I really use this, and it's really pretty, because anytime you plant a new tree, you can plant a little garden around it that benefits the tree itself. So I quite like that. And I don't have practical permaculture, but I really like the writing in practical permaculture. They're very like lawful neutral folks. They're very kind of in a box that I quite like, very linear, common sense. But they talk about microclimates. And I really believe that microclimates are probably the most important thing to residential design, because it can be completely different, and it's hard to find plants when you're choosing plants and all these different plants to make sure that they thrive in these small spaces that are completely different, you know. So those are three that I would recommend. There's tons of them at the library. So if you're at all interested in learning a little bit more about some of the fun things about vegetable gardening particularly, but I like to apply this stuff to perennial gardening and flower gardening and trees especially. And I think it's always very important to come at land design with a real responsibility. So that's the one thing about permaculture, is it just kind of asks you to really think about the future, because that's essentially what you're doing when you plant a tree or you plant any plants, things like that. So I believe that permaculture remains relevant, even though it's kind of nosedive, and it's because of this lack of regulation that they've decided to pull it from a lot of academic programs in agriculture and things, because they can't get a handle on it. But it is relevant because of our right to food, our right to produce, and how can we do that without pouring water on everything? How can we do that in our own ecosystems, in our own mini climates? How can we increase efficiency and decrease waste in this world where we really need to do that? But the last thing I wanted to share with you was this thing that has always had a huge effect on me since I learned about it. You are both old enough to know this one probably by heart. It's, being an 80s kid, this is kind of like burned into my brain. They call it a mushroom cloud, but really, I don't know. It has this distinct shape as the most exothermic reaction known to humankind, because all of the particles coming from that reaction are moving away from each other at a maximized amount, so that the space between particles are maximized. And what is so funny about it is that the most endothermic reaction known to humankind is a tree, and it has the exact same shape. So it bends itself into the same shape as this massive exothermic reaction in order to capture solar energy and turn it into carbohydrate that it stores for its own growth and its own nourishment, and in the process stops that solar energy from hitting the ground. And that's why trees are such powerful forces in keeping urban areas cool, and why it's so important that especially those of us who live in the older neighborhoods of town and near parks, that we contribute some of our water allotment to these massive creatures that are trying to keep the coolness down rather than just letting them go. I know they planted them, they're not supposed to be here, but since they're here, let's just kind of shuffle some water their way, because in the end, the amount of good that they do for urban environments is so enormous that that I think they're well worth the water. And in some cases, I think some folks, instead of growing food, just take care of your trees and take care of those big plants that keep your house cool, because the amount of energy that it decreases in oil and gas and all of the other things is quite enormous. And what's really interesting about this is that as these get older, these mushroom clouds, they get really, really tall and skinny, and they look like redwood trees.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think about this a lot. Um, but anyway, we are Living Cities in Your Yard program, now that we're almost through our first iteration of our education, is going to be kind of morphing into more of a publicly owned thing. So from our Lethbridge, Environment Lethbridge main page in ACT, you'll find Living Cities, and this is the Living Cities page, and down here in the corner is Living Cities in Your Yard. And I'm going to be working over the next few months in putting all of the information that I've created for the program into this public area, so you can peruse the information as you like. If you ever want to get in touch with me, that's where I am. And you can sign up for the newsletter at Environment Lethbridge. That's my plug. Please, do you have any questions, Kenny or John?
Sorry, Svenja.
Just kidding. Just kidding, Svenja.
So when you say about the trees, because we're going to plant a tree this year, and you say plant the bulbs around it, would you say that for any kind of tree, or is that just more for fruit trees to do something
No, I would do
special?
it for any tree. And are you talking about the front of your house when are you going to
Yeah.
put a big tree out front?
Hmm.
So I would really consider going to get this Vegetable Gardens Guide to Permaculture, or I'll bring it for you and you can borrow my book, because
Okay.
when you don't want to plant it in a ring, because that really isn't how nature works. It looks kind of funny. Um,
Okay.
Dynamic accumulator is they like to use Russian comfrey, which is a really beautiful, the bees love it. It's big and bushy, but it spreads like
Hmm.
crazy. So it would do well in your front yard because
That's
you can
good.
let it go for a while. But as soon as it
Okay.
starts to flower, you basically just take a knife to it and just go whack, 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 and it flattens down. And within a day, it disappears. They
Ah,
Comfrey is it's called knit bone, and they used to make poultices out of it and put it on
how do you
people's
write? You
legs.
said Russian?
Russian comfrey. And they have seeds at West Coast Seeds, and they also carried it at Greenhaven. They tried to bring it in, but you can get it at West Coast Seeds, and sometimes people have it, but it was outlawed for a while because it's quite an invasive plant. So, but so great for trees. I also use rhubarb as a dynamic accumulator, because I cut the
Mm.
big leaves off and I just place them around the tree, and that keeps they break down quite quickly, but it keeps the weeds down. So anything
Mm.
that grows really big leaves really fast that you don't mind cutting down, that's your accumulator. And then you can do a group of bulbs, right? And you want to put lots of like pollinator plants in there, and it just really benefits the tree. All the root structure is working together. Um,
So would you go for like lower growing pollinators then to not have too high of growth?
No, I mean,
Or does
I
it
would
not
probably,
matter?
for pollinator plants, I would probably go with self-sowing annuals like bachelor's buttons, things like that, because you can pull those so easy. You can just pop them out, pop, 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 if you don't want them
Mm-hmm.
anymore, if they start to get like annoying to you.
Mm-hmm.
But as your tree grows, because your tree will only be 8 or 10 feet tall, right? You can keep expanding that root ball and expanding that garden that's underneath it
Mm-hmm.
as the drip line goes further and further out, because you'll want to be moving the garden away from the base of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's a way that I always tell people to, when you have a tree, whether it's like young or old, it's a way, it's a place to start to get rid of your lawn. Like you can expose the root flare, which is always nice architecture, right? And then you can create a drip line bed around it and then keep creating, just keep pulling it out and out. And pretty
Hmm.
soon you have this massive garden instead of just lawn with a tree in the middle of it, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Can you share some other pollinator plants?
Sure. Let me think. What kind are you looking for? Are you looking for like, I'm gonna stop this share so we can bring. Are you looking for annuals or are you looking for perennials? What are you looking for, Dawn?
I tend to like perennials. I don't like having to bother with all the annuals in and out every year.
Okay, let me see what I can find.
I'm not a great gardener.
Hmm.
I don't spend a lot of time,
It's always like people
and
saying, I'm not a great dancer.
I am also not that. Um,
Full
so
sun, shade, what have you got?
uh, my front yard's starting to get more sun in it.
More
Um,
sun?
yeah, so I've had success with um, little tiny purple flowers, catmint,
Oh, yes.
and the bees are in there from like spring to fall.
Yep.
I love that one. There's, oh, I can't think of the name of it.
So all of the herbs like oregano, thyme, garden sage, lavender, mint, they are all great pollinator plants. And it's not just like you won't just see honeybees out there and bumblebees. You'll see the sweat bees and the little tiny native bees,
Yeah.
and the really cool those cool little flies and sometimes the little tiny parasitic wasps, which are really great in the garden because they eat things like the aphids and they eat all the bugs that you don't want in your garden. So all of those, and the deer don't eat it. So they don't, so any kind of aromatic herb, right?
Okay.
So all of those are great. I love garden sage myself. I think it's because it's silver. And any
Hmm.
silver leaf plant with hair on it is drought tolerant. It's a drought tolerant plant. So anytime you see a silver plant with the hair have fuzzy leaves,
Mhm.
they're really good drought tolerant plants. So I would recommend that. Blanket flower. Have you heard of blanket flower?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one, and it's a perennial, and it's got really nice architecture on it, so that they look like little ping pong balls when they go to
Yeah.
seed, and they're really easy to take, snap one of those balls off, and stick somewhere else, and you've got a full plant next year. You know what I mean? So I
That's a
love those. Coneflower always like echinacea, yarrow. They're always really great. Moss phlox. Um, Rudbeckia, Russian sage is another one that the bees just love. And get the miniature Russian sage. The big one kind of flops.
Oh, okay.
So the mini versions are really good. So those are some really good ones as well. I'm
Okay.
looking in my list.
Last year was the first year I saw the little tiny, tiny native bees in my front yard. And I went,
That's
I only
awesome.
recognized them. I didn't recognize any of the other insects that you talked about. What was the name of the wasp? That's
They're a
really,
parasitic wasp, so they're little tiny wasps. What are those flowers called? Oh, alyssum. You'll see them in the
Mm.
annuals. Alyssum's a great annual to throw in your yard because it self sows, but it's a really low
yeah,
growing ground cover. It's got those little tiny flowers on
yeah.
it. Um, the parasitic wasps love those plants, and parasitic wasps are pollinators, but they also eat the bad bugs in your yard. So they're great. It's great to have plants that really pull them in as well, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Amber, I have to go. I have to put
Okay.
the
It was
kids to
nice to see you,
bed.
but I'll see
They're,
you in
yeah,
a couple weeks anyway. See you,
yeah,
Svenja.
that sounds
Bye.
good. Thank you. Have a good evening.
You
Bye.
Bye.
too.
I'm just looking all these things up as you're talking.
Okay. Well, ask away.
I used to have a lissum in my yard, I think. now that
Yeah,
I'm
well, you can get them at any annual. And again, West Coast seeds. I mean, I don't. I love BC, and I'm always going to push like
Mhm.
BC. But there's some great seed companies in Alberta. Nobody's as good as West Coast Seeds. Like, as someone who raised all of my own plants for a long time, their germination rates are bang on. I've had tomato seeds for 15 years that still germinate. Like, they're
Oh,
just so great. And so they have so many great blends where you can just take their wildflower blends and kind of just shake it around the back of your yard and just forget about them. And then in the next couple of years, all of a sudden these plants are going to pop up that you don't remember ever planting. And yeah, they do great stuff. And you can get alyssum seeds through them. You can get so many different seeds through them, and you can really depend on their germination rates for sure.
well, I always get paranoid when I see those wildflower mixes and stuff because, like, how do I know there isn't something in there that's going to take off and become an invasive thing down my back alley or something? Like, this is
Um,
from working with the city. They've made me paranoid for everything.
Oh, you know what? I mean, it's a great question, but looking at my back alley and all of the invasive weeds that are back there right now, I'd sure rather have wildflowers that are, supporting some biodiversity rather than just these things that are going to cause massive fires. So most of their plants, um, most of the stuff that they have, and they actually have native mixes, but there's some great seed blends and companies here that do blends, and you can just get a single. But I would buy from places like West Coast Seeds because they don't do invasives, right?
Mm,
They don't do invasives. But and again, an invasive plant isn't necessarily a bad thing to plant.
right.
It does spread sometimes, but it's not hurting the ecology really
Okay.
of the back alley, I don't think. But
Okay.
again, we live in the city. We don't live in Waterton National Park, so I really applaud folks who want to do these native gardens, and I wish I had the time to do it, but we still like we can still grow thyme. They're not allowed to grow thyme in Waterton anymore because it's taking over, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
I'd love it for it to take over Lethbridge. It's never ever going to outcompete where the grass is anyway, like the coulee ever. There are varieties that of plants that will start to invade down there, but things like thyme and anything that has to outcompete grass, there's no way. It has to be like
Mm,
some kind of drill seeding weed to get through that stuff. You know what I mean?
yeah. So I also was thinking about what you